Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Well, hello, and welcome to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson, and in this episode, I'm going to talk about what men do. Sometimes it's a mystery to women about what men do. You know, these things are interesting topics of conversation. If you're in a relationship or looking to have a relationship, sometimes deciphering the man code can be a bit of a mystery. Women and men, the conversation's been out there that we definitely think differently, and because we think differently, sometimes we don't understand the motivations. In my last episode, episode 34, I talked about what men think. And with that, I hope to try to begin to change the conversation about men's behavior and at least help the understanding about what happens when a man is in a certain particular thought process. If you're having problems with commitment and not quite understanding that, sometimes you can even look inside yourself and at least have some compassion for someone else when you understand that in certain cases, there's really not much difference. We're sometimes talking the same or wanting the same thing, but we're just saying it in different ways. You know, it sort of draws back on that men are from Venus, women are from Mars, men are from Venus kind of talk. And in that, author John Gray talks about some of these sorts of things. And that's a book. It's in your library. You can probably get it online. But what I'm trying to do in having the conversation is to keep it elevated, keep it up so where we're actually thinking about problems and problem solving as opposed to just talking about it and just keeping it festering. Because that's the thing that happens with a lot of issues is they don't really talk about solutions. They just keep talking about the problem over and over and over again. Now, some people like that. I call that drama because that's not problem solving. That is merely living in it, stewing in it. And for being a person like that in your life, you have to ask yourself, what's the point? So in moving this along, as far as what men do, and I'll give you an example. In my last episode, I talked about the commitment phobics and sometimes the motivations or the driving behavior behind that, which has to do with the being disappointed. Now, that's just one aspect of it. And disappointed meaning, let's say you take let's take a young person. Let's say they've been promised to go to the park and play in the park for a while. You get that. The kid goes to sleep at night and he's thinking about the very next day after he does all of his chores and everything, or him or her, they do all their chores, they get to go to the park. Well, that never happens. That they keep getting promised things and they don't happen. Well, when people grow up, what individuals tend to do is they tend to stack the deck in their favor. They tend to always have a backup. And it's one thing when we're just talking about things. When you have lots of tools in the toolbox, instead of having one screwdriver, you have 4 or 5. But when we start talking about human beings, now it tends to take on a different dimension because you can become very hurtful in that sort of thing. So when I was expressing an understanding about commitment phobia, which a lot of people throw the term out there, but they don't necessarily understand what's the driving behavior. Now, I'm going to talk about in this episode some of the things that men do and how they act and sort of deciphering their actions. Now, talking about it a little bit, I shared something of the last episode, but it's to take it to the next level. Women, I want you to understand this, that men are attracted to someone that's like their mom. And here is part of the conversation. What men understand is they understand loyalty, okay? Even if they're not even doing it well, they understand what it feels like to have someone loyal to them. And if you can understand the relationship of a child to his mom, a young man, a boy to his mother, that's the one person who has been altruistic. She's always been there for him. And you see countless examples of this, and especially when there's been trouble. Kid gets in trouble. The newsreel, they interview somebody. They interview the neighbor. They says, oh, I never knew he was like that. And then you interview the mom and says, no, my boy could never do that, that sort of thing. And I mean, that's sort of a negative example, but I'm expressing that undying commitment, that love that a mother has for a son. So that's the groundwork for it. And as men get older, men are looking to replicate that feeling. Because what women perceive is men are only visual. Now, men start there. They look for a woman who has, let's just say, and I'm just going to be really general here, they have a certain look, a certain level of attractiveness. But as my executive producer was very colorful and he shared this, you have an expiration date. And if you don't have anything beyond looks, if you don't have any substance, then what's going to happen is that relationship is going to be very shallow. And what men do in terms of dealing with that shallow is they tend to stack the deck. I was talking about the commitment and understanding commitmophobia. And when men then begin to look for somebody to be in a relationship with, as women perceive that it's their good looks that's going to keep the man. No, it's your actions that are going to keep the man. If you really want to understand the meat behind this. Now, I can say sometimes some of the men don't deserve loyalty because if they've have done things that are not nice, broken promises, not kept commitments and things. I'm not telling a woman to stay in a relationship like that. I'm merely explaining that some of the actions that might help you to decipher the man code would help you understand what commitment means to them, how to attract a man and keep him, because oftentimes men are very insecure about some of the decisions they make and they look for validation. And a woman can be very good at validating a man's honor and commitment, because oftentimes men look to the woman that they're with for approval. And I can tell you from having talked to lots of men, it's not always about the looks. It's more often about the action. And men's actions oftentimes mirror their feelings. Here's an example. Men often discuss amongst themselves the attributes that their partner has, and whether it's looks, whether it's money, whether it's, a powerful family. Men aspire to have things that other men have. They don't necessarily want to take another man's woman. They are interested in having in their own experience that feeling of loyalty. So oftentimes a man goes and searches for that. He may search for a woman that has the looks, but he'll also search for a woman that has the loyalty. Now, when they have both in the same, then you've got it. But I'm going to tell you that while looks may be what a man may first attract a man, it may get him to turn his head, it's loyalty is what's going to get him to stay. And that has been proven time and time and time again. And if you understand that, then you can understand that as men get older, there is the conversation that, men keep looking for women who are younger and younger. And oftentimes that's to validate them. That's to feel validated. Because sometimes men, and it's kind of not a good thing for men, sometimes they don't necessarily grow up. But let's talk about those that do. Let's talk about those that really do learn from their life's experience and learn what it is to be more of a man, to be in the relationship, to show that they are committed, and on the woman's terms too, not just man trying to dictate everything, but in in that level of conversation that shows that, to the woman that she's important. What a man appreciates also, and this is part of that loyalty thing, is when, as a woman, you come back and tell your man how you represented him. That makes the man feel very proud. And he knows that people will look at him differently because the woman shows the loyalty. I mean, you can see how this loops back and becomes a complete circle, because he will honor you in public. And by doing that, that obviously is going to make you feel better. Men are definitely willing to hold hands. They're definitely willing to put their arm around you. They're definitely willing to be the protector. And these are the kinds of things that I've heard women say that they want from a man. A man will deliver that in spades as long as he feels like you're loyal to him. Here's another thing that men like to do. Men like to feel like they're a hero. Men will fix things. They will come to your rescue because they feel that when they're able to accomplish something for your benefit, that you will become more loyal and more respectful of them. And I can't overemphasize that. That's probably the one thing that when a man, that will make a man stray, is if he does not feel respected in his relationship. Because as men, we endure a lot of stuff that we don't talk about. And there's the disappointment that we endure, whether it's the feeling like we've let our significant other down. Yeah, inside we feel disappointed. We're disappointed in ourselves. We're not disappointed in the women. We're disappointed in ourselves for not figuring it out what we were supposed to do. And when that happens to us as men, then oftentimes men go into their man cave or they go into their hole. When I say man cave, I'm not just talking about going to the garage, which some guys have that, and they've got all the flat screen TVs with the sports shows on and the memorabilia and all the guy stuff. But I'm talking about into that emotional cave where they don't talk because they're trying to sort through their feelings. And sometimes for a man, it's simply about just burning off the adrenaline, the chemistry that's going on in the body when you get frustrated and feel dejected and feel angry and so on and so forth. I know as a guy, I like to go fix things. That's something I'm good at. If something is broken, I pick up my tools and I fix it, or, play an instrument or something like that. Those are my ways to burn off that anxiety, that frustration that happens when I've done something that's displeasurable. But in the interest of women understanding that men are just trying to process things, they're not necessarily trying to shut you as a woman down, but their action is that they know they have to be contained. They know they have to be responsible. And that's one of the ways in which they do it. One of the unfortunate things that men do when they're dealing with stress is some of them take to alcohol excessively, and others take to drugs excessively. And I'm not just talking about the prescription type. I'm talking about the recreational type. And when they get involved in things like that, that obviously changes their personality. That changes who they are, because these things change your inhibitions. Whether it's because they get high on something and they tune you out, or tune everything out per se, their kids, all of their responsibilities, which can be very unfortunate, or the alcohol, which could either dull their senses. There's the happy drunks and there's the mean drunks. And I hope, that's for another conversation. But these are some of the actions that men take when they're dealing with the stress. And this isn't to say that you as a woman are putting this on them. Some of it is just a man's perception about what's happening also. And they need to learn how to find other ways of decompressing. But that sort of describes a man's behavior. Men oftentimes come in from their day to their home to separate from the rest of the day. Vis-a-vis, they create the man cave being the place in the home that has all of his own stuff. And it's sort of a sanctuary inside of the home. By having that place, then they can go through that transition period and then reconnect, because There's the family, which they've created, which is very important. And then there's the rest of their life, which they live day to day. And there's that transition from the rest of their life to the family and then reconnecting. And the most important person in all of that is you, the woman who is a partner to this man. And then it's in recognizing that when you have that role in the relationship, that he does want your understanding, your commitment, your love, and he will reveal himself to you. It takes work. By an example, men talk to men a lot about these kinds of things. Sometimes not very skillfully, because when you've experienced it, men sort of use a shorthand. There's a sort of code. There's the nod and there's and the guys kind of stand around when it's a group of them and they can all kind of relate. Because relationships there's a lot of commonality in it. When men come home, then they obviously have that experience that they're trying to reconnect. And what I would ask is that as a woman, when you're trying to decipher what the man is going through, try not to bring the drama to the conversation, because it's amazing what women believe is helping winds up hurting. Because raising the tension, raising the stakes or the intensity in a situation like that does nothing to de-escalate what's happening. Because that's not reconnecting. I mean, if you can imagine the difference between when you approach a person getting a hug or getting a shove at the shoulders where you're getting pushed away. Well, this loud screeching or the angry face or anything like that, that's a penalty flag. Open arms, I love you, where's the hug, and then you embrace. That's all saying, wow, I'm in a good place. And men love that. And by the same token, men are very capable of giving that in return. They just like to know that their example of it is being recognized because they know that they're supposed to give it. They also know that the perception is that they don't. And being recognized for these things, and it's a shared experience. I know women like to be recognized for their contribution too. And so do men. And I think this is the powerful thing, that you understand that sometimes it seems like men aren't leaders. Well, they're leaders in other areas, but when it comes to the emotional part, women seem to be much stronger in being an emotional leader or the emotional beacon in a relationship. And I hope all of that sounds familiar. And I'm going to take a short break. Be right back after this.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hello and welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I am your host, John Johnson, and this episode we're talking about what men do. Trying to decipher their actions. When men do a certain thing, what does it mean? Men obviously have their own code, their way of communicating, and when it comes to women deciphering that, it's like we're different. Men are definitely different from women, and I think we've understood that, but it's how do we interpret a man's actions? Well, I'm a guy, so I guess I should say, how do you interpret a man's actions and get the right clues? Sometimes it's as simple as just asking him what he thinks, because quite often the simplest things get left out. Remember, men aren't necessarily trying to be complicated. They are just being themselves. And when it comes to explaining a lot of stuff, men don't necessarily do a lot of explaining. They just do it and figure it'll be all right. Or at least they hope. And when it comes to you understanding their actions, when you're questioning a man about what he's thinking, remember, have an open mind, because there are a lot of things that defy a woman's perception of logic as compared to a man's perception of logic. And I'm trying to think of an example here. A simple one would be, let's take laundry. When a woman's doing laundry, she probably is skilled enough to know that there's certain things that you put in the laundry together. You put all your whites together. You can put your heavier fabrics together, and nice dainty things. You don't put those in with the heavier things because it'll make them pill up and get nappy. Well, a guy's logic would be, okay, just throw everything in the washer. We'll get it done, and it'll be over and done with. Well, see, a man's logic is to try to get the job done. And obviously a woman's logic is looking at, okay, how do we take care of these things so that everything is done to the best, so that it looks nice when it comes out of the laundry. You see, we're both looking to have the same impact, get the job finished, but the logic behind the two is totally different. And I hope that, that's a simple analogy, but I'm just hoping to illustrate that there's a difference in the way they're thinking. When you ask a man, understand this, and this is where the respect thing comes. It's okay to ask questions. Believe it. There's not something that says that you can't ask a question. But when you're questioning the logic, try to understand that it's from his perception. And judging that almost feels like, to a man, when you're judging the decision, it almost feels like you're being disloyal. Do you get that? Because when the decision gets made to do something, the decision is made to do it because it needs to be done. And they're not trying to shortchange anybody. They're not trying to rip anyone off, not trying to steal. They're trying to get an end result. But when you come across as questioning that decision to do it the way they did, what to a man feels like disloyalty, what to you seems like it's a teachable moment. But you've got to be sure and communicate that this is a teachable moment. This is how it should be done so that we have the best effect. And, here's this thing where, men have to be responsible for this too. And it's the tone of voice. It's also about being sensitive that when you're in a vulnerable spot, the tone of voice, you don't want to be talked down to, you don't want to be made fun of, and that might, sound like we're talking about the fragility of someone's ego. But I think it all has to do with, adults tend to react to things differently than kids. And sometimes when we are in adult mode, when we are in teaching mode, we think we're talking to kids, which sometimes seems like we're being talked down to. So it's really important to watch the delicate part of that nature. And I think that's where, when you have a good relationship with somebody, you can learn how to communicate with somebody, with your partner, without making them feel dumb. Now, to the men who are listening to this, I know you can relate to this, but here's the caveat. When you're talking to your woman, remember, do not talk down to her as though she's dumb, because women really detest that, because it feels like disrespect on all levels. Because it's important for men to understand that women have had fathers, and fathers cherish their daughters, and what they do is they talk nice to them. Now, that may sound like, okay, well, you're not her daddy, but you do have a responsibility to be caring and loving and respectful towards your woman. Just like for women, you understand that sons have mothers, and it's that love, and it's that tone of voice that sounds nurturing and caring and loving is what they like. That's what they appreciate. When you communicate things on that level and in that space, it helps break down some of the barriers, and I think you can move a lot further along in understanding each other when you recognize how to speak to each other. The really interesting significance to this is, I think when we learn how to talk to our mate, we actually talk to our mates differently than we talk to anyone else, because there's a lot more at stake when you think about it. It's the balance in the relationship. It's the happiness at home. And I think intuitively men understand that. It's in the execution of that they have to get better practice at it. And it's usually when they've been in the relationship a while that they get better at it, if they haven't already learned something ahead of time. Men who have had sisters, for example, probably understand that a lot better than men who have had only brothers. And it's that the level of conversation, the way in which you talk to women is different. And women appreciate that respect, that acknowledgement that they are individuals, much as anyone else would appreciate that. One more thing I'd like to emphasize, and it's how a man perceives himself in your eyes. Now, one of the things that's so vitally important is that they be seen as the individuals that they are. When you compare a guy to your past boyfriends, that's signals to a man that, one, especially if it's a negative thing. I mean, it's, sometimes when you're thinking about old relationships, there's an understanding that it's in the past. But oftentimes when these comparisons happen, they happen in the midst of an upset or / an argument. And when you're comparing notes, when you're comparing people, don't compare your man to previous boyfriends, because men take that as an insult. They may not say it right then and there. That means they may react it, but they may not. But what that does is it sort of breaks the loyalty code that's unspoken in a man's heart, because a man does not want to be reminded or be told that he reminds you, a woman, of somebody that you don't like. That's a hard pill to swallow, even if they do something that is not nice, because they think the explanation can be made to them that they did something wrong without bringing one of your ex relationships into it, especially one that's over and done. Because if it's following that pattern, then what he's looking at is the future of the relationship ending. And, men will be real secretive about the fact that, okay, I'm pulling out of this relationship, at least emotionally. I may not do it physically right now, but emotionally I'm checking out and I'm going to save myself. And you may wonder how that looks. Well, there is the emotional disconnect. There is the not wanting to make plans. If they were a person that did it before and they seem to be not doing it now and not really having explanations as for why they change, you might go back to some of those conversations and think about what happened that we had an upset. Is there something that's unresolved? The unfortunate thing is that a lot of times men won't bring this up to you because they don't want reprisals. They don't want to continue the drama, because that's something that men don't do very well. They tend to, when they have an argument in a relationship, they tend to get loud. Some of them get loud and boisterous, and they seem like they're not listening. But that's a defense mechanism. That's a cover up. Because when you think about it, when people are getting loud and being boisterous and stuff, that's really a fear that's causing that. Okay? That's really fear that's driving that. They're afraid of losing something. And unfortunately, they don't say that. I don't think men understand that that's what they're feeling. If they did, they could probably just easily say, hey, I'm afraid. Now, I don't know how that sounds to you, but they probably think it sounds like they're wimping out, whereas it should be looked at as an honest expression of how they feel, and that I really don't want this to end. I'm really trying to work at this. And sometimes men realize that they bumped up against some of their limitations and they're going to have to do a lot of work in order to fix it. So we can talk about that in another episode. I've kind of reached the end of my time here, but I just want to say thank you for listening. I'm John Johnson. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast, and I was talking about what men do. Join me next time, And we'll talk about more issues and things that are relevant to men and women, romance, relationships, and the like. Thank you for listening.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.